Are you or your partner struggling with past traumas that's affecting your current relationship? If so, this episode is for you. Tune in as Dr. Jude shares with you so many tips and strategies and information about how to have a healthy relationship in dealing with past traumas. So stay tuned. Hey, you guys, welcome back to the Faith and Mental Wellness Podcast. And so today's episode is actually a replay of the Faith and Mental Wellness Summit from March 2023. But the content and information here is still so relevant. Dr. Jude shared with the audience how to navigate trauma, how to really heal and still be able to be in a healthy relationship. You guys, he goes over so many different things. So I encourage you, if you can, get out some pen and paper or, take some mental notes if you're driving or working out, wherever you are, to really learn how to navigate your relationship. He is full of knowledge. He's full of wisdom. And so primarily you're here mostly his voice. And you'll also hear, my former assistant, Joey, who will introduce him into the audience. And at the end, there's a Q&A where people are asking him questions that are so great. And the feedback about his topic was so great. So I know that it will bless you if you take out time to listen. And so let's go ahead and get into it.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the second half of the Faith and Mental Wellness Summit. We are so excited that you guys are joining us for our last couple of speakers. We've got a great one coming up next. Just while I have everybody's attention, I do just want to remind you that we do have a store. We've got some great gear, as you guys can see here. We've got a lot of t-shirts. There's some sweatshirts. There's some coffee mugs, anything that you want. There's a lot of things in that store. So we would love for you to join us and buy some goods. You can't go wrong with that. Next up, we got Dr. Jude Austin. He's an LPC supervisor and an LMFT. He's going to be talking through the New Testament love, overcoming unresolved trauma in relationships. Dr. Jude Austin, he's got a lot of letters, a lot of credentials behind his name. He has a PhD in Counselor Education and Supervision. He's an LPC, LMFT, NCC, and a CCMHC. He's currently an assistant professor in the counseling program at the University of Mary Hardin, Baylor, Go Crew, and serves as the program's clinical mental health counseling track coordinator. He's also in private practice in Belton, Texas, where he focuses on couples and individuals. His research focuses on counselor education and pedagogy, specifically finding ways to help counseling students develop therapeutic presence in session. He was a 2021 American Counseling Association Conference keynote speaker and will be the 2023 North Dakota Counseling Association's conference keynote speaker. Let's give a warm welcome to Dr. Jude Austin.
Cool. Thanks for having me, man. This is exciting. Here, I'm going to answer all of this stuff in the chat. I see a lot of haze, so I'm going to put, what's up to everybody. So I'll be talking for about an hour on this topic. I love this topic. I called it that New Testament love, overcoming resolved trauma in relationships. And like Joey said, I'm Dr. Jude Austin. What he didn't mention was that I'm married. I'm an elder in my church here in Temple, the Vista Community Church, and I love doing that. The community work is awesome. And I got two boys, a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old boy. I'll show you guys some pictures later. They're super cute, but they are destroying my house right now. And so my wife is watching them. But if y'all hear some loud noises or if I have to run out and get a fire extinguisher, everything's fine. It's standard procedure over here. And so let's see what else. I got a twin brother. I have a twin brother. His name is Julius Austin. And so if you Google us or something, you'll see us writing together a lot. We write a lot of books together. I think I've written 7 books so far. So 7 books in 7 years, all counseling related. And I'm kind of writing the books that I wish I had when I was a student, which is awesome because it makes it a lot more fun because it feels like I'm talking to myself, Anyway, so that's it. So we'll be covering this topic, that New Testament love. I know you guys are watching and I see a lot of the pictures, but if you feel like talking or asking questions while I'm doing it, feel free to go ahead and ask questions. You don't have to wait until the end. We will have some time at the end, but if something comes up, go ahead and ask, right? So let's get started. I have some notes here, so you'll see me kind of go back and forth to my dual screen, but let's get started. So I broke this presentation up into about 4 parts, right? We'll start with the foundation, which is kind of my ideal of grounding it in biblical, like a biblical grounding, like a foundation. So we'll talk a little bit about kind of how I get my ideal, some of the theory behind it with Martin Buber and things like that. And then we'll move into talking about trauma, small t, little t, relational trauma, trauma's impact. And then we'll go into theory, which are some of the counseling theory, not necessarily like Freud and Pavlov and all of that stuff, but some of the theoretical ideals, like some of the hypotheses that people have on how to help people unresolve trauma and how to help us unresolve trauma in our life. And then we'll move into some of the practical application stuff at the end about how to connect and reconnect, how to reduce anger, and then how to build healing and trust in a relationship. So the way that I see this in my mind, that I conceptualize this in my mind, and I'm doing this because it helps me and I hope it helps you guys, is that I'm going to talk about in the foundation part what a relationship looks like when the trauma has been processed. All right. So I'm going to start there. I'm going to start with this is what it looks like. Right. And then we'll move from there to how to get that stuff done, right? How to get there. So we'll start at the end and then we'll move through how to do it. I had a conversation with my wife last night. We were watching some movie and I was telling her, I was like, man, I feel like I enjoy movies and stories a little bit better when I know the ending. I know somebody's probably feeling that. Like I probably can get an amen in the chat or something. But for some reason, whenever I'm doing that, maybe it's because I'm a therapist and I hear people's stories all the time. I like when I know, okay, everybody's going to be all right. Okay, tell me what's going on, you know? And so that's kind of how I set up my presentations all the time. It's like, okay, here's where we're going. And then here's how we got there. I'm seeing a bunch of amen. See, I'm not crazy. Y'all go tell her that I'm not crazy. Because I do kind of feel like she was looking at me like, I don't know, man, like I had 3 noses or something. So let's start with the foundation. So we'll do New Testament and then the I-thou relationship. Yeah, let me see if I can click there. Did it go back? Okay. So the foundation. Okay. So this is some of the stuff that I feel like helped me to conceptualize trauma, especially when I think about the Bible, right? So there wouldn't be a Bible without trauma. I know that's a hot take, but just hear me out. Right? There wouldn't be a Bible without trauma. The reason why, right, if you think about why, the capital, it's lowercase w, not capital W, but one of the reasons why is because people needed something to get through suffering, right? People needed to remember. And so when I think about the Bible, like when I read through it and I do the Bible in a year, I did that a couple years ago. And as I read through it now, I conceptualize it as dialogue, right? It's just one big dialogue between us and the writers, between the writers and God, between us and God. It's a huge dialogue. And what the text reveals is resilience and strength in people, right? The individual strength, the collective strength, overcoming trauma takes dialogue, right? Having that dialogue with God is multifaceted, right? Having that dialogue with Jesus is multifaceted, just like having dialogues in our relationships can also be multifaceted and complex, right? A relationship that is striving, even though there has been trauma experience, is a relationship that has learned to navigate the tensions of that dialogue, Right. And that's kind of what I'm teaching clients, couples, when I'm seeing them, is how to manage the tension of that dialogue. Right. Even Jesus, when he was crucified on a cross, he died in dialogue. He was going through that trauma in dialogue. And so helping clients see that, helping couples see that, and contextualizing that, to see the dialogue as something that's real, is something that I try to do, regardless of what the trauma is, right? If I can teach them to do that, then they won't need me anymore. So to unresolve trauma in a relationship, you have to do it through dialogue, right? And not just talking. You don't just talk about it, which we'll talk about later. But you got to do something with that dialogue, right? Okay. So here's some ideas around the New Testament, right? Some ideas that I pulled out. I'm not going to read the PowerPoints, but I'll tell you guys what I'm thinking, right? So what dialogue does is it creates communion, right? And the New Testament, Jesus left us that way. God left us that way, with an unshakable will to communion, right? He pulled us into communion, right? And he's constantly pulling us into communion. If you think about yourself having a bungee cord attached to your belt loop or something, you want to feel the tension of that relationship, right? The character of that love, the character of that relationship, is founded by obedience, acceptance, and then a giving of oneself, right? And you'll see this, it's in scripture, but it's also in theory if you know how to look for it, right? When I say obedience, I try not to get couples to think about obedience as you do what the other person says. No, you're obedient to the relationship that's built on dialogue, which then creates the communion, right? We're all doing that. We're accepting of the relationship, of what we bring to the relationship, and then we give a little bit of ourselves to the relationship, not to our partner, right, but to the relationship that we both co-construct and maintain, right? I hope that's making sense. It feels like it's making sense in my head. And so unless people start a mass exodus, then I will assume it's making sense to y'all. So you'll see the shift in the New Testament, right? From the Old Testament, you had this character of suffering, like suffering for the sinner, right? And sometimes we do that in relationships. I think when there's unresolved trauma in a relationship, a person can feel like that's love, right? A person, like, I think there was some kind of comic that said, like, in an abusive relationship, you'll hear people say, he hit me because he loves me. If he didn't hit me, then how would I know that he loved me or she loved me, right? That's the kind of ideal I feel like people get when they don't understand God's love for us in the New Testament, right? Because in the New Testament, right, God's love, it's forgiveness poured out for the sinner, right? Towards the unworthy, right? And I think that's the perspective we have to take, right? We don't deserve anything in the relation. It's nice to get it. It would be nice if we had love, unconditional positive regard, empathy, genuineness, immediacy, right? But we don't necessarily deserve those things. And I feel like sometimes when people have unresolved trauma, it turns into this perspective of everybody deserves love, when they don't. They really don't. They don't. And I have to remind you, you don't deserve it. It's nice if you get it. Yeah. That will come back when we talk about irrational beliefs and how it's not necessarily the thing that gets us, but it's our beliefs about the thing. So just put a pin in that. Let's see. And then the last thing on this topic is that marriage is a communion of life and love. That's what it is. You have dialogue, which then breeds communion, or I guess dialogue begets communion, and then communion begets forgiveness, and then forgiveness begets love. And then the marriage is a communion of life and love, right? Like you're doing this together, but it's almost like every day you have to wake up with the willingness to commune, right? In life and in love. And I try to teach couples, to build that relationship that pulls the other person towards them, even when they're fighting, even when they're arguing. I'm doing that, you know? So anyway, that's the New Testament. That's my ideal of the news and how I frame the foundation of a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about, right? This idea that it starts with dialogue. Dialogue encourages communion. Communion encourages forgiveness, and then forgiveness encourages love, right? So that's what I'm trying to do. So a relationship that is striving with unresolved trauma, they have those things. All right. So let's see. So let's talk a little bit about trauma, about small T trauma and big T trauma. I run a group on Mondays called Empaths Unite. And it's a group of a bunch of people who identify as empaths, you know, and it's an awesome group. Most of it are women of color. I think the whole group is women of color. Goodness, I think I'm the only guy in there. Anyway, it's a great group. Somebody yesterday, as I was preparing for this, she said, man, trauma is trauma. Like trauma is trauma. It doesn't matter. But it does matter. Like it really does. Sometimes I feel like in relationships, my therapeutic relationships with clients, is that sometimes physical trauma, like big T, like sexual abuse, physical abuse, that kind of domestic violence kind of trauma, sometimes that stuff is easier to heal from because you can see yourself physically heal from that stuff, right? It's not easy, but it's easier to hear as clients would describe it, right? Little T trauma, small T trauma is more insidious a little bit. It's the stuff that kind of seeps into your bones. It's the relational trauma, right? I have a lot of this stuff in the notes. So if you're looking at the PowerPoint, there's some notes. I updated the PowerPoint a little bit. Sorry, y'all, but I'll give you guys the updated PowerPoint. Trauma occurs when there's a consistent disruption, right? A consistent disruption of a sense of being safe and loved, right? So when your partner is constantly disrupting that feeling of safety and love in a relationship, that can cause those small T traumas, right? And that stuff will go unresolved, mostly because the partner who does that ends up gaslighting the other partner, right? It's like, I know I didn't do that. Why are you taking it that way? Or what you hear a lot is, why are you so sensitive? You know? And that stuff, man, it creates these little small T traumas that it doesn't necessarily impact you in the moment as much, but sometimes you're driving home from work and you kind of space out and you think, did he just say that? Wait, am I going crazy? And you call your friend, and your friend's like, nah, he meant it that way. He said what he said, or she said what she said. And you're kind of grappling with that stuff, you know? And so how people do that is through either enmeshment or abandonment. Right? It's one or the other. Those small T traumas occur that way, right? And you can see that in people's families of origin, right? Is that a lot of people's unresolved trauma has to do with either being too close or too far away from somebody, right? When we talk about theory, we'll get into attachment styles and attachment issues, right? Seriously, I feel like I can talk about this for hours. Somebody better stop me from talking in a little bit. Let's see, abandonment, and what was the first? Enmeshment. So enmeshment. So it's like a relationship that is too close, right? It's like when a mom or a parent says something like, we're best friends. You know, if you listen to Michelle Obama, you would know that ain't how it's supposed to be, right? You can't parent your friend. Like there needs to be, as my mom would say, a little bit of fear in that, healthy fear in that relation. Like when you're in church, you know, and you're sitting there and you're acting up and you feel your mom just kind of like bore eyes in the back of you. Like you need that, and you can't do that if you're somebody's friend. And so sometimes it gets a little bit too close, right? And I'll show you guys that when we look at a genogram a little bit later. So the trauma is not necessarily the issue. And I know that sounds weird because I'm talking about trauma and it is the issue. It's not necessarily the issue, right? What we've found, not we as in me, but what therapists have found in doing research is that you have these activating events, the A, adversity. So you have the trauma happening, whether it's abandonment or enmeshment, right? Sexual abuse is enmeshment, right? Emotional detachment is abandonment, right? That's the kind of turning a child into a parent, that's enmeshment, right? So you can see how these things can happen. So it's not necessarily the events that cause the issue, right? Those events will often lead themselves to see, right, the emotional and behavior consequences, right, which is maybe somebody getting angry, somebody getting upset, somebody getting depressed, somebody getting anxious, right? All of those symptoms that people present with, those aren't the problems, right? People will try to make it seem like that's the problem, right? Like, I'm feeling anxious, I want to lower my anxiety. That's not the problem. The anxiety is a secondary emotion. Depression is a secondary emotion. What we try to do in therapy, and what I encourage you guys to do with your clients, whether or not you're coaching or you're in a pastoral role, is to get underneath that secondary emotion and get to the primary emotion. Like, you are anxious because, right? So you have to focus on the B, right? What people miss is when a traumatic event happens, it causes a consequence, but the belief, right? It usually sparks a tiny belief about yourself, other people, or the world. And those beliefs are usually irrational. You hear them say things like must or have to, or they'll speak in definite terms, right? Definitive terms, right? Like, I'll never find a good man, like that kind of stuff, or no one will ever love me. It's that irrational belief about themselves, other people of the world, that they have to take responsibility for, that I'm pushing people to take responsibility for. That's how you unresolve trauma. That's how you start to have dialogue. That's how you invite the communion. That's how you start to forgive. And that's how you can start to love, is by first loving yourself through disputing these irrational beliefs, right? So you have to get there. So nobody's responsible for trauma, right? Nobody's ever responsible for their trauma, but they are responsible for managing how their trauma impacts other people and impacts themselves. And you can get them to take responsibility through helping them to gain some awareness with those irrational beliefs, right?
Are you passionate about helping others to heal on purpose? Or are you trying to figure out a way to reach these people and get paid for it? Well, consider becoming a certified Christian life coach. Empower Purpose Academy is the perfect place for you to be able to come and get equipped to be able to help those that God has called you to serve. No matter where you are in your journey, whether you are a leader in ministry, a therapist, or you're a mentor, or someone who is looking to expand their knowledge and to grow their business, my academy is specifically for you. This summer only, I'm having a summer promo. For you to learn more about it, go visit www.empowerpurposeacademy.com. And also, I put the link for you in the description box. All of our students have had nothing but great experiences. Revelation after revelation after revelation of who God has called them to serve. They have received clarity. They have received the tools they need to be able to help those. And not only that, you'll also learn how to set up your business, your structure, how to market, and so much more. This program is very robust. So again, don't forget to go to the link in the description box and download your free guide, 10 Essential Tips to Beginning a Certified Christian Life Coaching Business. Talk to you soon.
If they don't, right, what'll happen is people tend to think that trauma, if you just talk about it, it'll shrink over time, right? They tend to believe, if you look at that top left jar, like trauma is so big at first, and the jar, it's taking up the whole jar. And then what they think is over time, it kind of gets smaller and smaller. But that's not what happens. And that's not how I want my clients, or I want you guys as clients or people to be in relationship with this trauma. I want them to start thinking about it as what really happens is that we grow around our trauma, right? Like our growth gets bigger. Who we are, our awareness, our insight gets bigger. And the trauma kind of stays the same. It's always going to hurt, And I think sometimes that helps clients. It takes the shame, the healing shame away from some of this unresolved trauma, because they come in. Oh, good. Somebody uses that image frequently. That's great. With grief clients, yeah, it started with grief. Right? It's the same thing with trauma, as that you want them to start thinking about it as, man, this trauma I may never heal from this trauma, but I can take responsibility for it, and I can grow around it, because I feel like that sometimes that's the suffocating part of this experience, is that like people will start to feel like they will never overcome this, it's not something to overcome, it's something to grow around. And so when people can get that perspective, when they can see that perspective on the trauma, then they can start to have a relationship with the trauma, and they can start to have a relationship with their partners, right? The relationship I'm trying to get them to have is an I-thou relationship compared to an I-it relationship, right? Think of that spider up there as the trauma, and think of that chair. I use this chair a lot in class because it helps, like the chair I'm sitting on right now, right? So if I had unresolved trauma, I would see this chair that I'm sitting on as an it, right? It's just a chair, it's an inanimate object, right? And I would struggle to build a relationship with this chair. And here's what I mean. I would struggle to see that chair as supportive, as comfortable, as safe, right? Now, that sounds weird because we're using a chair, but you can replace this chair with a person, right? And so when people aren't able to unresolve the trauma, when they aren't able to get to their logical beliefs, their rational beliefs, and start to build a dialogue, then they will only ever see their partners as inanimate objects, as its. They won't ever say that, but unconsciously they do. And so someone will date someone and they're not even dating the person. They're in a relationship with their trauma, and their partner is helping them cope with the trauma. Right? That partner is not only as useful as they can help them deal or process, right? People don't say this stuff consciously, but unconsciously, what I've seen is people doing that. And so we have to get them to build a healthier relationship with their trauma so that they can start seeing their partner, so that they can start building better relationships. And they'll do this with everything, right? They'll have an I-it relationship with their parents, with their co-workers, with their family, with their kids, and people will feel that over time, like that disconnection, and so the more we can clear that up, the easier it will be for people to have these deep, kind of long-lasting relationships. What I'll say later, but I'll say now, is that people don't date people. People date patterns all the time, twice on Sundays. They date patterns, right? Hopefully you can date intentional enough and with enough awareness to then transition from an I-it relationship to an I-thou relationship, right? hopefully you get into some therapy and you don't just talk about your trauma, but you talk about how that trauma impacts your beliefs about yourself, other people in the world, enough for you to start recognizing your patterns so that you can start seeing your partner, right? And you don't just date your pattern, right? That's why you see, and you guys have friends who do this, man. They've been dating the same person with a different face for years, talking about, I don't understand why this doesn't work, you know? It's because you're not doing anything different, you know? And even if they date somebody who's different, the pattern is so locked in that they will create the pattern in their relationship, you know? And you hear it in counseling a lot. People say, I'm never going to date somebody like my dad. And they never do. But what they do is, because the patterns is so unaware for them, that they will turn their partner's relationship with them into the same relationship that they had with their dad, you know? And then you see him in an argument saying, you remind me of my dad, where it's like, well, you created this relationship as well, you know? I'm seeing a lot of snapped fingers. Uh, Good. I see somebody talked about this at length. Yeah, awesome, man. It is. I feel like sometimes when I say this to couples, they look at each other like, well, who's doing the patterns? You know, both of y'all, man. Everybody's doing the patterns, you know. And couples, right? You'll see this in your work. An individual will try to, I feel like I'm pointing at y'all, like, don't let this, they will try to pull you into the pattern, right? So if you aren't grounded, like if you aren't aware of your own patterns, you'll just be perpetuating the same patterns in your relationships, you know? Okay, let's see. Let's move into a little bit of theory. So I'll go through some of this stuff quickly so we can get to questions, because I know I'm going to end at like 12:20-ish, about 10 minutes, 12:15, and then we can have some questions. Unless I need to end early. So let's talk a little bit about the theory. So I explained a lot of this stuff already, but this is something that I usually show clients. So this is a genogram. I'm sure you guys have seen this before. But one of the things that I try to do with people, let's see, but how do you break down the patterns? Yeah, I'm going to get to that in the theory. Yeah, in the theory. So this is how you break down the patterns. So I usually have couples sit down and draw a genogram just like this, right? With their usually 3 generations. So you'll see, you know, this bottom generation where it has you. This is the couple, right? You and your ex-husband, let's say they came into counseling, right? Then you have the sisters, you have the mom and the aunties, and then you have the grandparents here at the top. And so what I try to get them to do is talk about the relational dynamics within their family of origin, right? I'll do one for one partner, I'll do another for the other partner, right? So they can both draw it. We talk about arguments, we talk about distances, we talk about dysregulations, we talk about alcoholism, addictions, all of this stuff, right? And what genograms do is they have a key, and you can start to draw lines, little squiggly lines of arguments and things like that. Who had an argument, who had beef, who did this. And once you get the whole picture, you draw for the other partner, and then you pay attention to the similarities, right? You'll be able to map out, right, the patterns, right, by seeing the similarities between them, right? You'll start to see, oh, your parents argued, my parents argued, or you had distance between your dad, I had distance between my dad, or I'm super enmeshed with my mom, or you're super enmeshed with your mom. And you'll be able to start seeing those patterns, right? And what those patterns will show a lot of the times is their attachment, right? So when I think of attachment, I think about a boat that has a rope tied to a bigger boat, right? So you imagine your parents in a bigger boat, and you have like a little rope attached to you, right? And you're out in the world, you're feeling the rope tied to the bigger boat, which is your parents, right? You feel a certain type of way in that boat, right? So if you have that rope attached to you and you're out in the world exploring it, and you feel it go a little bit slack, and you looking back and you're just worried, like, man, if I get into trouble, will my parents be there? If I get into trouble, will they be? You're constantly looking back, constantly looking where you're going, constantly looking back. Oftentimes that is an anxious attachment style, right? If you get into trouble, you look back and the rope is completely slack, and it's always been slack. So every time you get into trouble, you're crying, nobody really comes to help, right? You start to think to yourself, well, I'm just going to stop looking back because nobody's coming. That's an avoidant attachment, and so on and so forth. But the reason why attachment styles are so important to explore, in addition to the family of origin, is because you can start to see the complementary relationship styles that couples have, right? Like, for example, somebody who has an anxious attachment, right? 9 times out of 10, they're going to date somebody with an avoidant attachment, right? And so if somebody's experienced trauma, right, and their belief about other people because of that trauma is that nobody cares, nobody's ever going to come and help. I got to do this life by myself, solo dolo. I don't care about people, right? That person will develop an avoidant attachment, right? And then if somebody also experienced trauma and it's unresolved, and they think, I need people, I have a man-sized or a woman-sized hole in my heart, right, that I need to fill with somebody, then they can develop an anxious attachment, right? The anxiety in both is the same, but you'll see them develop a complementary relationship style where the anxious person will be pursuing the avoidant person, and then the avoidant person will be running or distancing themselves from the anxious person in the relationship. It'll be perfectly balanced, but one person is going to be avoided and one person is going to be anxious. So you'll see them just chasing each other, right, in the room, right? You have to get them to be aware of it. So somebody said, how do you break the pattern? The first step is oftentimes awareness. A lot of the times, man, couples are an individual, they don't even know the patterns that they're doing. They don't even understand their family of origin, right? They don't even understand the anxious attachment or attachment styles that they have, especially if you're working individually. So the first step is to build some awareness. Awareness is paradoxical, right? It is absolutely paradoxical, right? In that once you become aware, you can become unaware, but you need to take that first step towards breaking a pattern. You need awareness. If you do not have the awareness and insight, you won't have any solid ground to stand on, right? You won't, right? And it's very important whenever you're starting to understand conflict, right, in a relationship, right? Um, so we understand trauma, we understand the need to start exploring the irrational beliefs behind it. We know that it's not actually the event, but what the beliefs about the event, how the beliefs is impacting us, right, about self, other, in the world. Right? We know that in order to break the patterns, right, that people have, we need to be able to gain some insight. So we need to talk about family of origin. We need to talk about attachment styles, right? So when I think Maisha mentioned, how do you break the pattern? So the patterns are called cybernetic feedback loops, right? I know that sounds super fancy, but it's another word for patterns, right? These are the patterns that people and couples get into. They get into these negative feedback loops that we have to break. We have to make them aware of it. So sometimes I will literally draw these patterns in the room. I'll tell a couple, okay, tell me about the issue, right? Because, man, couples, they will come. I've had a couple have a drop down argument about M&Ms, about who ate whose M&Ms after somebody put it in the freezer. I mean, we're talking about, man, we are talking about screaming, getting up, scaring me. I'm thinking I gotta call the police, right, over M&Ms, because it's not really about M&Ms, right? So what typically happens is there's tension in the relationship, then a symptom happens, right? If somebody has unresolved trauma and is causing them to be avoidant, they'll run. If somebody has unresolved trauma and is causing them to chase, to be anxious, they'll be anxious, right? So the tension happens, and then you'll see people's stuff get kicked up, right? Anxiety, depression, suicide, self-harm, addiction, whatever it is, the symptom is going to pop up, right? Something happens, the tension subsides, and then they go right back into homeostasis. So what I ask couples oftentimes is, how did y'all get back to be able to come to therapy today? How did y'all how did y'all get back? What's the home? And you'll hear them say, I don't know. We got to get them to know. That's the first step of breaking the patterns is getting them to build some awareness, right? So here's some examples of a pattern, right? So sometimes she's stressed, right? Me as the guy, I offer suggestions, right? My suggestions make her feel criticized, right? She's upset because she thinks I'm critiquing her. I feel misunderstood. You never understand what I have to say. Why are you so sensitive? You're just like your mom, right? Which then will get me kicked out, right? And then you argue with each other, and then some kind of way it resolves. You stop talking, you go away, right? This is what I tell couples not to do. Like, there's some sense when there's like danger, like serious, stop, take a break. But when nobody's in danger, don't run away from it. This is an opportunity to build some connection, right? So you argue with each other, something happens, then you go back to normal, and then now she's stressed again, right? This is like 2 weeks later. You offer suggestions, she feel criticized, you feel misunderstood, you guys argue, things go back to normal. 3 weeks later, she's stressed again, right? And it's not just her, because you do it for the guy as well, right? Or the other partner, right? They have their own patterns. So what you'll see is this like cybernetic loop where they meet sometime in the middle and there's friction, and then they go back into that homeostatic pattern, right? So to break the patterns, we got to build awareness of it, right? The theory is that any small change will make a huge difference, right? Any small change. So this is the same way, right? He either does something to fail her, right? She feels as important. She feels like this happens all the time. She judges him, criticizes him harshly, right, for being a slacker. He feels badly. He knows that she is right, and so on and so forth, right? You got to get couples to be aware of this, right? Man, if they aren't aware of this, right, there's no way that they can make steps towards resolving some of that trauma, because you can resolve the trauma relationally. You don't have to do it individually. You can do it individually in counseling, but even the therapeutic relationship is going to be the thing that heals the trauma, right? It's not the technique. It's not the homework you give them. It's not the words of affirmation. That stuff doesn't work. It really doesn't. It's a Band-Aid, but then it eventually comes back. You got to get to the second order change issue, right? What's going on underneath all of this stuff, right? So repairing trust. I got a couple more minutes left, and so I'm going to try to get you guys to start. This is how you kind of punch through some of that stuff, right? So we have the biblical foundation. We understand what trauma is. We understand relational trauma is small t. We understand that in order to break the trauma, you got to build awareness of it, right? You got to build awareness of your family of origin. You got to look at the similarities. You got to build awareness of attachment styles, right? We're not doing anything yet. You're just building awareness of it, right? Because you're trying to create dialogue. You're trying to create communion. You're trying to create forgiveness. You're trying to create love, right? So you got to build the awareness so they can do all of that stuff, right? Man, once they have awareness, once somebody has awareness of, oh, this is what I believe about myself, other people in the world, and this is what I'm doing because I believe that stuff. This is how I'm treating you because I'm believing that stuff, right? Then you can start molding them, right? They become like clay, right? You can start working towards connection and reconnection, right? And so activity that I like doing, I'm just going to share this. We don't have time to practice it, but I like to make couples reenact those patterns, right? So you see these patterns here. So this argument, I'll have a couple reenact it, right? Now, let's go back to this one because it's easy. So I'll have them stand about 10 feet apart from each other. And then when she expresses, I'm stressed because such and such, I'll have him, if the way she expressed that makes him want to take a step closer to her, he takes a step closer. If the way she expressed that makes him want to take a step backwards, he takes a step backwards, right? So she'll share, and then he'll respond with a step closer or further away, right? Right. So let's say he takes a step backwards, and then he responds by offering suggestions. And the way that he offers suggestions makes her want to take a step closer or further away. I'll have her do it. And so you'll get them practicing moving. You want them to see the relationship as tangible and malleable. And you want them to see how their trauma responses are impacting their partner, right? Whether moving closer and moving further away. The whole point of getting them to do that is to get them to talk in a way that builds communion. You want them to see it. You want him to see when he says stuff like, well, you should just, which is what they do. You want him to look at his partner and for his partner to go and then take a step back and for him to go, oh, let me try that again. What I meant to say was, and then he tries something and he gets to see her take a step closer. You want them to you want them to see that happening, right? And it shows them that like it doesn't take anything big. You want them to heal. I'm gonna say this again. You guys are gonna get sick and tired of this. You want them to heal through dialogue, right? So 96% of the time, you can predict the outcome of a conversation, right? Within the first 3 minutes of that conversation, right? You can predict it, right? This was Gottman's work, right? For those of you who heard of Gottman, right? You can see the prediction right then. So when they're practicing this stuff, right, you can see whether or not it's going to work or turn into an argument within the first 3 minutes. That's what this activity does, right? And so what we have to do is get them to practice startups, right? Harsh startups, soft startups. We got to get them to fight smarter, right? Man, half the time with people who have unresolved trauma, even if they're in the process of resolving, half my work is trying to get couples to learn how to fight better, right? To fight and argue in a way that builds communion, right? To have the dialogue, to be able to pull your partner closer to you, just like God is constantly trying to pull us closer to him, you know? And so you'll see this stuff, you can read this, but basically, when a couple is having a harsh startup, they usually are leading with criticism, right? There's some nonverbal cues to pay attention to, right? Soft startups usually have some understanding. There's more curiosity in that. There's more vulnerability, right? And it's not something that's cheesy as, well, when you do this, I feel this way, get them to use their own language, because the relationship has a culture and you want to honor that culture in the relationship. Don't teach them how to talk like a therapist. They ain't therapists. Get them to heal through dialogue within the context of their relational culture, which means you have to step into that culture. You have to have some ability to do that, right? And so in those soft startups, right, how we present ourselves, well, we can get into polyvagal theory and some other nerdy stuff that you don't have time to. Email me if you feel like being a nerd, because I can go there. But how our face is set up, right, sometimes can communicate safety and vulnerability. And so a lot of the times when we're trying to break down these patterns, I'm commenting on, hey, do you know that you look like this when you say that? Do you know that this, you got to kind of pick up on everything, So let's see, I won't get into this. You have it there. I really wanted to talk about healing and trust and building healing and trust in relationships. So this is that healing triangle that I was talking about a little bit earlier. when we talked about building dialogue, when we talked about attachment styles, when we talked about the out-out relationship, what we're really talking about is a triangle, right, between us, our partner, and our pain, right? That trauma, like I said, man, that trauma is not getting smaller, right? It's not. And we got to help clients to not conceptualize it as getting smaller. We got to get them to start thinking about themselves as growing around it, right? And so when people don't have the ability to resolve the trauma or to at least process it, they can start an unhealthy triangle, right? Like I said, they have a relationship with their pain, and their partner really just helps, right? So the problem a lot of the times with this stuff, and this is why this work is so hard, is that sometimes these unhealthy triangles and dysfunction feel familiar, right? They genuinely feel familiar. And that's why you have friends, you hear them, you have clients, you hear them, and you're like, man, how can you not see that this is unhealthy? Because it just feels so normal, right? It just feels so normal. So helping clients see these triangles, sometimes I will, use blocks or something in the room to get them to see the connection between self and pain, and then their partner. And when their partner comes, how the pain goes away. And when their partner leaves, the pain comes back. And it's just, to get them to start building healthier relationships. So all of this stuff is just helpful in that. So to build trust in the relationship, I usually will suggest that they listen to the person's anger and hurt. They empathize with them. They ask what they need to prevent the recurrences. And you can do this in that activity that I show, because it really does break down the cybernetic problems, right? Taking responsibility, heartfelt apologies. You can start practicing that through the dialogue. And then continue to have honest conversations. That's like the hardest things for couples to do, is to have honesty. A lot of the times, I'll say this and then we'll throw it out for questions, is that in those relationships where the trauma is unresolved on both sides, is that the relationship is too fragile to handle honesty. And so you can sometimes have two people lying to each other. They're not lying maliciously, but lying out of safety. They're kind of manipulating each other for the safety, but the relationship can't handle honesty. And so when they come into counseling, they say what everybody says. What's your problem? Communication. The problem is not how they're communicating. The problem is that they aren't communicating about what they need to communicate about, and so being able to process some of those beliefs will help strengthen the relationship enough to be able to handle the dialogue, to be able to handle the communion, to be able to handle the forgiveness. Forgiveness to somebody in pain seems like a threat. Love to somebody in pain seems like a threat. Communion to somebody in pain seems like a threat, right? And so you got to get clients to remember that the relationships are real, that they're tangible, right? There's a weight to them. There's an elasticity to them. You have to get them to feel that, right? You got to get them to take responsibility for the patterns, not the trauma, not the pain, but the patterns, right? Their beliefs, right? When you can start to externalize the problem and see it happen in real life, then they can start fighting smarter. They can start fighting for closeness and not for correctness, not for rightness, not for vindication. They can start fighting for closeness, and when they do that, they can start seeing their partner clearly, right? They're not in relationship with their problem. They're in relationship with their partner, right? They can start building trust over time, because it's like a muscle. The more you work it out, the stronger it gets. Anyway. All right, that's all I got. I know that was kind of a lot, but I don't know how much time we got left, but with the time we have, I can open it up for questions. This is my personal email, so if you guys have any more questions that we don't get to, feel free to email me, because I love talking about this stuff. So what questions do you guys have for me? here I'll end the show and then kind of bring you guys back, if you have any at all.
Thank you for the presenters that have already presented. Dr. Austin, a quick question. What would you say would be either two primary mediators and or moderators to the trauma that you talked about? Because you said we grow around the trauma, right? It doesn't grow, but what would you say would be the precipitators of the trauma?
Yeah, you know, if I understand the question right, then I would probably say a lot of the times I feel like growth doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? And I feel like sometimes whenever we want to grow, our family of origin or the systems around us, right, we can't grow in those systems, right? Not saying we need to change systems. I'm just saying sometimes that stuff will mediate. Sometimes that stuff will get in the way of our growth, because if I'm experiencing trauma, right, it's unresolved. I'm trying to unresolve it, but that means it will change my relationship with my dad, right? Then my dad will do everything unconsciously to try to keep me from growing, right? My mom, my cousin, whoever it was that maybe perpetuated that trauma, even my partner sometimes would do that, right? And so sometimes we have to have dialogues with the people around us if we're growing, right? I tell this to people who start the couples or who start their counseling program. Don't jump into a relationship right when you start, because you'll be growing so much. Sometimes the people around you, right, your growth will be an infection to them, right? So if that answers the question, that's the basic ideal, is that sometimes it's the people around us that keeps us from growing. Sometimes when people come out of that, you don't have to move zip codes, but sometimes going into therapy is like a Switzerland. Like therapy is like Switzerland. You don't have a zip code in therapy, right? And so it's your own little space to be able to process stuff without having those mediating factors weighing in on you, that pressure, right? If that helps.
Dr. Nicholson, did you have a question?
No question. He already took care of everything. But I did want to come on camera and show you that you're not by yourself. So we're holding it down. So, but great job. Great job.
I appreciate that, man. Seriously, this is so fun. I know I get a couple of minutes left, but I just appreciate the work that you guys do. I've been looking at a lot of the things that you guys do, and man, like the relational courage it takes to be vulnerable in the spaces that we are vulnerable in is commendable. I think it is genuinely hard to do this work in the community. It's genuinely hard to have these relationships with multiple people in the community, because we get pulled in so many different directions, you know. And I know, being the parent of two young boys, two young brown boys, you know, it's like you feel sometimes that you're being pulled in so many different directions, and trying to maintain those relationships is hard. So I just want to acknowledge that the work that you guys do is it's awesome. You know, there's ripple effects in all of the stuff that we do. So.
All right, and I think Miss Shantae had a question for you.
Go ahead. Shantae.
Yes. Oh my goodness. I want to say thank you so much. I mean, it's like it was so good that it put a lot of things in perspective for me. And
Good.
Especially when you said to write down like your partners and write down your family and just see the different patterns.
Man.
Because what I have noticed for me, and just being transparent and honest, is that there are some patterns that I'm trying to understand. Why am I still going through this or feeling like this? And it's like I'm getting mad with the patterns of the things that keep showing up, because it's like you are affecting my life. Like the patterns are affecting where I'm going. So I thank you so much, because you really, really helped me to put things in perspective, and also to dive into the patterns and be able to have some some language to what I was experiencing.
Yes.
So I appreciate you
Yeah.
so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Of course, man. Of course. Seriously, I get a big whiteboard and several different marker colors, and I just go to town in session. I did that for myself, for my wife, like first, not first date, but pretty much first date. I was like, so tell me about your, like you gotta get into it, because I think when you have that perspective,
Yeah.
and then you can start to do stuff with it, it's when you don't have that background,
Yeah.
and you don't understand what's coming out of your background to your foreground, and what's impacting your environment. That's when you start hurting people. That's when you start getting hurt,
Yeah. And being real sensitive. So this has really put,
Yes.
oh my goodness.
Yes.
I'm excited. Thank you.
Good. Use my email. Seriously, email me. We can meet for a Zoom coffee or something and chat more about it.
Oh, awesome. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. This is Dr. Jude Austin at gmail.com.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you again, Dr. Jude. Like everyone has been saying, it's been absolutely incredible to learn from you. I know I'm at Kristen. I was able to go to your seminar. What was it? Last year that you did over a couple?
Yeah, last year.
Yeah. Man, I can't believe that was already a year ago. But as soon as I joined the team with Shakita, I said, yeah, we got to have Jude. So super glad that you're able to make it and everything worked out.
Awesome.
We are going to go ahead and we're going to take like a 5-minute break.
Thank you again for being a part of the Faith and Mental Wellness podcast community. Don't forget to visit www.faithandmentalwellness.fave to learn more about our directory, our virtual meetups that we have bi-monthly for healthcare professionals, and to also learn more about our trainings and other resources. Thank you again for being here, and we'll talk to you guys next time.